Our third and last program for today is with senior educator Michael Evenesh, a Golan resident, and he is going to discuss, I must say, I hope everyone hears me, right? Can you guys write in the chat? Everyone hears me? Good? Yeah, okay, wonderful. Michael, there's a reason why we asked Michael as an excellent guide and educator to take this topic. This is probably, forgive my language, the sexiest topic in the Golan for the past few months, up to COVID-19. Every group I personally briefed at the border, and I'm assuming Michael and other tour guides I see here in the group have experienced, everyone, the first thing they say is, 1 second, what's with the spy? So really the excellent Netflix series brought Eli Cohen to international headlines, I can say, and many people don't know that there's an Eli Cohen trail here in the Golan that's basically following his path since he visited her a couple of times, as Michael would say. So Michael, the floor is yours. We're anxious to hear what you have to say, and we're going to enjoy it.
תודה רבה. תודה, Yaakov, for starting this and initializing this. If Israel is a startup nation, then Yaakov is the startup high priest of the Golan. So we're thankful to him. I'm gonna split this up into 4 pieces, some basic information about Eli Cohen and his story. We're gonna talk about the trail itself, which has 8 different stations. Then we'll try to talk about the 10 or so most important things that at least the public knows that Eli Cohen brought to Israel when he was in Syria. And lastly, we'll try to take a look at, from what we know, when I say we, I mean the greater we, people who are in the public sphere and not in the intelligence sphere, what more or less was accurate in the spy and what wasn't, as far as most folks can tell. The story of Eli Cohen, the truth is, there's very little written in English in a book form, things that can be annotated. The first and main book, which was more like a booklet, came out in 1969 with a big red cover and with a kind of a gruesome picture on the front called, appropriately, Our Man in Damascus. And for most people, for many years, this was really the only English manuscript that you could say was written with some kind of authority. A number, not many, but a number of books have been written in Hebrew. Unfortunately, they haven't been translated, and I'm hoping that in the wake of The Spy on Netflix, then someone will pick up the opportunity and bring to the English-speaking public some more information about Eli Cohen and his life and his double life. Obviously, because we're talking about highly secretive people and highly secretive organizations, we don't really know, the public, what is true and what isn't. We can only go on the books and the people who were given, as it were, the stamp of approval from the intelligence community. And there are, in some ways, conflicting things that different folks talk about. But assuming that most folks have seen the series called The Spy, perhaps some haven't. So I'm just going to go through the Aleph Bet, pretty much, of Eli's story, with, of course, some pictures, some from books and some from pictures. That there is an Eli Cohen website that's put out by the family, sponsored by the family. Unfortunately, at the moment, it's only in Hebrew. There were parts that used to be in English, but they've changed it, and I'm imagining it's only a matter of time until there is an English part of it. But that doesn't mean it's free of errors. As I said, there's many different conflicting stories, and some of the stories we'll probably never know exactly what happened, and maybe it's good that we don't know exactly what happened. There's still a lot of myths out there. We'll try to dispel a few of them. So let's take a look at some of the pictures here that will take us into the story of Eli Cohen. There we have a handsome man with a mustache. That's the classic, iconic, almost iconic picture of Eli Cohen. Eli was born in Egypt, but before we talk about Eli, let's just take a look at the map of the Golan Heights and see where we're talking about. And the trail that Yaakov mentioned is a relatively new trail and was invented, as it were, and put into and the first person who actually took people on the trail was the man who came up with it, who was a tour guide named Gil Brenner, who also has connections to the intelligence community, and also had a sculptor, who Yuval Lufan, who was one of the finders with his brother of the boat in Kibbutz Ginosar, known as the Jesus boat, for those who've been there or have heard about it. He volunteered his time and effort and put sculptures all over the Eli Cohen Trail. So officially there's 8 stops, and this is a picture of the Golan Heights. You can see that 6 are in the southern part of the Golan Heights, and then there's the central part of the Golan Heights doesn't have any, and then there's 2 up above here towards Quneitra. So after telling the story, just the kind of headlines of Eli Cohen's story, we'll talk about these 8 stops and how anyone actually today can do these stops. So Eli Cohen, here's a picture, the classic bar mitzvah picture, holding his talit bag and wearing his talit. He was born to parents who were born in Syria, but he was born with most of his family in Egypt, in Alexandria, where there was a very big and prosperous Jewish community. And one of the stories that one of his siblings tells is that he used to have a hobby that on Shabbat, he would sit on his porch and look down and see and wait for 10 cars to go by. And when they went by, he would then recite the 10 license plates by numbers to his brothers and sisters. That's good in general, not just for a spy to have, but this man had an incredible memory. And one of the things that everyone who had met him talked about is that he had charm. He was a charming person, very sociable, very charming. And this, of course, also helped him in his job and in his life. His family, they were very Zionistic, and they decided to move to Israel. And Eli could have moved to Israel, but he decided to stay back and specifically helping other Egyptian Jews in all kinds of different things, especially those who wanted to move to Israel and make Aliyah. So he already was kind of knew how to sacrifice his own wants, because of course he wanted to be with his family in Israel. But he decided to stay back in Egypt for a few years. And then after the war in the Sinai, which was in 1956, Egypt expelled almost all the Jews from Egypt, and he was simply taken, left. They had to leave everything they had, of course, in Egypt, everything that they owned, and of course money, and they were just taken to Italy. And from there he got to Israel, and pretty much immediately afterwards found work in intelligence, actually, but it wasn't something fascinating. It was translating articles in Arabic into Hebrew. Anybody who's working in translation, it can be kind of boring. And he thought that he could do much more. And he decided to start off on his own. He left and he became a clerk in a store. And thought that he would be able to rise through the ranks. According to most of the sources that we have in Hebrew, the Mossad got him fired from that job. And then when he was unemployed, they came to him with a great offer that he should join them. And the background for all that is that the Israeli intelligence community had decided in the late 50s, early 60s, that it was very important to get people, feet on the ground in Syria, to let Israel know what was going on. And that not necessarily where there's a tank and where there's a cannon, but also the spirit of what's going on, and what's going on in the government, and what's going on in all ways of life. And Eli was accepted this job. And before that, when he was a clerk, he met his wife, Nadia. You can see their marriage here. They lived in Bat Yam. The whole family lived in Bat Yam, a southern suburb of Tel Aviv, if you can call it that. And Nadia was from Iraq. Her family was from Iraq. And over here is Sophie, who's the matriarch of the family. And so they got married and they settled down, and he got this job. And at the time, people would lie to their spouses. Today, I think it's a little different. But at the time, he actually was told to lie to her and say that he was going to be a buyer for the Department of Defense, instead of telling her what really was going on. But the idea was to get Eli to slowly make his way into Syria. Now, for those who, let's say, are from the United States, to send someone who knows Egyptian Arabic into Syria is kind of like taking someone from Mississippi and telling them to try to go into Boston and try to pretend that they were born in Boston or Brooklyn, right? After one word, just say the word coffee, coffee. The guy's not local. So in a way, this man had to have an incredible amount of intelligence and flexibility to unlearn much of the Egyptian Arabic and Egyptian Arabic ways of life also, and to adopt the Syrian Arabic. But luckily his parents were from Syria, so he already had kind of like a head start. This is a honeymoon at Rosh Hanikra, where the beach, Israel's beach with the Mediterranean, meets the border with Lebanon. And right after their wedding, they went there. A beautiful picture, beautiful people, very happy. He was very happy when he got the job. Nadia, not so happy. And recently, she has been allowed herself to be interviewed a number of times and talking about everything. It was, if Eli made a huge sacrifice, one of the people who perhaps paid the biggest price was Nadia. And Eli, of course, did his arithmetic, and perhaps she did also, that this was a price to pay. He was sent to Argentina, and this is his, actually this was after he moved to Damascus, but he was sent in as an expat to pretend that he wanted to go back to Syria from Argentina, and he knew exactly where to go. He went to all the clubs where folks hung out who were Syrian expats. He gave a lot of money to charity, and talked very loudly about his patriotism to Syria. And he was in Argentina in 1961. In 1962, he actually made the move to Damascus. This is the apartment building he rented on the 4th floor up here. And he had access to the roof where he put his antenna for sending Morse code. And this is a famous picture, him sitting with, in the back, the intelligence base for the Syrian Ministry of Defense is right behind his head. So when things were going on late into the night, he would know and would report. And he became incredibly successful. And the 3 years that he was in Syria, he was in the inner circle of the most powerful people in Syria. And it just so happened that he chose the right side when there was a coup, which also helps. This apparently was planned by the folks in Tel Aviv. And already in Argentina, he was taking sides, which could have been dangerous, but in the end it worked out. Here we have him climbing the steps with the head of state. Hafiz, and this is the Minister of Interior. They're walking into the Parliament building. I mean, this is the top, you know, the starting five of the Syrian basketball team in politics, and Eli's right there with him. Incredible picture. And he would go back now and then to Israel, of course, via Europe, and his daughter, their first daughter was born. He was back for that. Her name was Sophie, Sophia, named after her grandmother, the matriarch. And all in all, they had 3 children. He would come back now and then, but for brief periods of time, and then he would return. And when he was there, he in Damascus, he was pretended to be a very, very successful import-export man, and also a very sought-after bachelor. He'd have pretty wild parties in his apartment. He'd give the keys to high officials who would use the apartment for discreet personal meetings. And he was an example. He made friends with the Syrian Minister of Information, and he got a radio slot. And he had a national radio slot where he would broadcast to the expats in Argentina. Fascinating story. So there was a time when he was even considered to be and asked to be the second man in the defense ministry. He already was advising many of the people there. So he would send back amazing information, which we'll talk about afterwards. And after 3 years of living in Damascus, going back and forth, he was caught by the intelligence services, and he was tortured. This is a terrible, terrible picture, which I think can give us nightmares. After he was tortured, you can just imagine the unspeakable, I mean, Holocaust-like stuff that they did to him to get to admit all kinds of things. What a terrible picture. Such a handsome young man, and they've just twisted his entire face from the torture. The judges that judged him, the 5-judge panel, all knew him and were scared to death that he was going to give them up. So they told him they'd make a deal that if he didn't disclose anything about them, and he said, "I don't even know you, I've never seen you before," then they would spare his life, which was a lie in the end. Because obviously he was, after being tortured, he was killed by hanging. And to this day, this is also part of the trial. He's on the far left. And they did allow him one thing. This is Eli with his back towards us. And this is how the Netflix series actually began. They let the chief rabbi of Damascus come and do the vidui, which would be, I guess, like the last rites before he died. And he gave him a letter to give to Nadia instead of the ones that they forced him to write beforehand. And they let that letter go through via the rabbi. And he was led up to the gallows and said Shema Yisrael and died. He's become a hero all over Israel. And there probably isn't a city that doesn't have an Eli Cohen street or school or synagogue. And one village here in the southern Golan is named for him, Eliad, which you could translate as Eli forever. And about 7 years ago, Gil Brenner, who's, as I said, a tour guide, he established the Eli Cohen Trail. And it wasn't made to be hiked because much of it's only traversable on a road. And the whole thing takes between 2 and 4 hours, let's say half a day to do it. And if you do other things on the way, you know, you can make it into an entire day. You could do it on your own. You could do it with guides. Gil Brenner himself still does it. Other guides do it too. And they made, as I said, 8 different stations. Lastly, before we start talking about the stations themselves, it's important to remember that in the 1960s, the entire Golan, which Israelis at the time called the Syrian Heights instead of the Golan Heights, was a closed military area, which means not only foreigners were forbidden to go into the Golan Heights, but even Syrians who didn't live in the Golan Heights were not allowed to go there. It was pretty much used as a base for shooting down in Israel. And also, as we'll see later, as you know, if you've seen the movie or read the books, for taking water. away from Israel to kind of dry out the new Jewish state. So the mere fact that Eli was allowed, that got himself to visit the Golan, thanks to his personal connections, is really pretty incredible. Let's take a look at the first station. Is at Hamat Gader. Hamat Gader is at the very, very southern tip of underneath the heights of the Golan, but it's part of the regional council of the Golan. And you can see here in the back, these mountains, and actually even these fields here are already Jordan. Syria is a little more to the left, but remember that the Golan Heights used to be Syria. So this used to be the border between Syria and Jordan for about 19 years or a little more. And it just so happens that this point is a place of ancient hot springs, and they've been here for thousands of years. Back from the time of the Romans, Jews used to come here, pagans used to come here. There's many stories of people coming here because the hot springs were known then as therapeutic. Sulfur springs, you can smell it when you get there. And today, it's still that, a very popular place, mainly for folks who have aches and pains, but and also mainly in the winter, because in the summer it's really hot there. But it's open at night also on some nights, so you could actually, and they even have a hotel there. So theoretically, you could actually start the Eli Cohen Trail by staying here or by visiting here the night before, and then doing it during the day on the way up. But the first station is actually at Hamat Gader, right outside. So you don't have to pay the entrance fee to the hot springs. In order to get in, you go around the side and you get to this, where there are three things. There's a plaque on the left, a sculpture on the right, and in the back is an explainer box where you push the button in Hebrew or English, and it tells you the story of Eli Cohen. And there are a number of these boxes on the way throughout Israel, but also on the Eli Cohen Trail. So here on the left, it talks about Eli Cohen, and that he was a spy sent by the intelligence community in the 1960s to Syria. And here the sculpture has a kind of famous picture of two people schlepping this cluster of grapes, which of course brings us back to the biblical story of the spies who were sent by Moses from the desert to the promised land to find out what was going on there and then come back. And they came back with, among other things, a cluster of grapes. So using this kind of biblical imagery of the spies bringing back the grapes, the sculptor decided, Yuval, to put this here. And at this place, this is a very interesting story because in the beginning of the British Mandate between the two world wars, a Jewish man and a Muslim man decided to get together and open a spa hotel at Hamat Gader, just like there is today, just a little less fancy at the time. And it was a joint effort, and it worked out pretty well until 1948. In 1948, the War of Independence didn't allow that really to exist. And afterwards, in the island of Rhodes, all the countries that were part of the conflict slowly over time agreed to stop killing each other at some point. Syria was the last one to do it. And part of the agreement was that this would be a DMZ, a demilitarized zone, but part of Israel. In other words, it's part of Israel, but Israel is not allowed to have soldiers or things like tanks and jeeps there. And at some point in the 1950s, they just decided, we're going to take it over. They just did it. And as they say, an agreement is only as strong as the paper it's written on, and nobody did anything to them, and they just took it over. So there wasn't much of a hotel going on there. It was kind of taken and used by the Syrian top brass. And this is a place that Eli Cohen got to. Now, how did he do that if it was a closed military area? Well, he had friends in high places, including a relative of the chief of staff. And he told them one cold winter day in Damascus that he missed Argentina so much because it's freezing here and it was so warm in Argentina. And if he can't get to warm his bones, he's going to go back to Argentina. And his friend said, don't worry, I can get you in here. And he did. So he visited the Golan 3 times during his 3 years in in Syria, and this allowed him to give amazing, invaluable information to the Israeli intelligence community. So that's Hamat Gader, and it's about a 5-minute drive until you start the ascent up to the Golan Heights. You get to what looks like just a small building, a booth, which was actually a customs house, apparently built by the French, because when the British got the British mandate over Palestine and Egypt, the French got the French mandate over Syria and Lebanon. And if one were to drive up into the French mandate at the time that it was a mandate, in the 20s and 30s and 40s, then you would be checked at this checkpoint by the French. When the mandate ended and Syria got its independence in the 1940s, then it became simply a Syrian guard post where they checked people going up into the Golan Heights. And inside of this building that you can stop at, there's a little bit of parking there and a little dangerous, but you have to be very careful here. You can actually go in, and there are pictures that all have to do with Eli Cohen's life. You can see them here in the building on the left. And these metal plaques are actually, this is what Gil Brenner did, which is really amazing. He got the actual permit that Eli Cohen had gotten from the Syrians, signed for Eli Cohen. Of course, it didn't say Eli Cohen. It was his fake name, which was Kamed Amin Sabit, and he photographed it on a metal plate and put it here at the entrance to this booth, because he had to show this each time he went by. An incredible thing, even if you don't understand it. Like, I don't read Arabic, but it's pretty incredible that this is here with the date, and of course there's plaques here that explain everything, what it's about. So we already have seen 2 out of the 8 stations, and now you drive up the Golan Heights, a very beautiful and winding road. Some would say one of the most beautiful roads in all of Israel, as long as you drive slowly. And as you get up almost to the top of the plateau, a little more than halfway, you get to an area where, if you notice here, there's very ugly cement blocks. One in front of the woman with the red hat and 2 or 3 behind them. Unfortunately, on most of the information put out about the trail, these are mentioned as being French-made anti-tank blocks, but actually, thanks to an archaeologist in Golan, whose name is Eran Meir, he actually took a look at how the blocks were made, and he discovered that they were actually made by the Syrians. It's not that important, but there was a little camp here, so that there was another possibility of a roadblock. In other words, the Syrians were very wary of foreigners, of people, of spies coming into the Golan Heights. This was a very big, most important border that they had, and it became very, very secret and very, very dangerous to be here. And the fact that Eli was here 3 times is incredible. Now, there is a very weird sculpture here. I have to say, I don't know anything about art history or quality of art. It looks kind of grotesque, but actually it's supposed to be, and this is not made out of clay. This is chiseled out of basalt. Try to do that one day and you'll see how hard it is. This is supposed to be a 4-sided face, where Eli is actually, there's of course many different ways to understand it, but the classic way is that you can actually see 4 countries from here: Israel, Lebanon, Syria, and Jordan. Eli had to look each way, but not only that, he also had to have eyes in the back of his head and play a multi-faced game, and had a number of identities that he had to stick to and be on his toes at all times. So even though it's a little scary, the sculpture, it actually does have meaning. And the sign here says in Hebrew, Eli Cohen, the trailblazer, because in Hebrew, this would be literally translated as one who breaks through with a new path. And because there's a roadblock here, this was kind of like symbolic for Eli coming through. Let's move on to station number 4. Station number 4 is in a kibbutz Afik. And if you drive in, at the edge of the kibbutz on the promenade, there's a huge carob tree. And next to it is an old cement Soviet-made building that was the Syrian Officers Club of all those officers serving in the Fik area. What is today's kibbutz Afik was at the time a base and a support village known as Fik. Before that, it was a Jewish village. There's actually a synagogue there, and they found a pillar with a Jewish name on it. And so it's many layered. And today you can just drive into the kibbutz and go and visit this place. Eli, as was also shown in the movie, knew how to party with the Syrian officers, and he would come here often during the 3 times that he went through. Now today they put a sign there that says the Mount Nebo Lookout. You cannot see Mount Nebo from here. That's near the northern part of the Dead Sea, but it refers to a biblical story. For those who aren't familiar, Moses, before he was going to die, he was very close to the border of the land of Israel. He begged God to go into the promised land, and God said, no, you're going to have to die here. But he let him look and see in almost a metaphysical way the entire promised land. And the verse in Deuteronomy or Dvarim says, this is the land. I have let you see it with your own eyes, but you will not cross over there. And Gil Brenner thought that this was a very, very perfect name for this building, because Eli, when standing here afterwards, when he went back to Israel, told his bosses in Tel Aviv that when he was standing here looking down right into the Kinneret, he said the following, and this is a quote of his: when I saw Tiberias on the other side of the Kinneret and the kibbutzim of the Jordan Valley, I was hit hard with a deep yearning to just escape, to take a boat and get away. And then I suddenly felt like I was a lighthouse that's marking the path of a boat named Israel that's in the straits. Just a beautiful poetic way of saying, I really just wanted to quit my job and come back to Israel. But I had a moment of weakness, like I just wanted to run away, but I couldn't do it because I realized I'm all I've got here. And I'm holding the torch. And if I don't hold the torch, the boat that is out in the straits, using a simile, of course, will never make it to safe harbor, to the Golan side. So this is really a beautiful lookout point. There's a spring nearby. You can actually do a hike here, a short hike, and it's next to a kibbutz. It's a beautiful area, looking down from the Golan to the Kinneret, and that is station number 4. Station number 5 is a few minutes drive away, and it's the entrance to a very big Syrian important camp known as the El Al camp. And this is the site where the village today called Eliad, Eli forever, named for Eli Cohen, where it sits, where it's situated. And at the intersection is the rock that has something very special printed on it, and that is the official indictment that when Eli Cohen was in court and they were handing down his sentence, they read the following indictment, which I translated into English, and it goes like this. Whereas the proofs and facts submitted to the court, he didn't even have a lawyer, he couldn't defend himself. Whereas the proofs and facts submitted to the court have convinced us without any doubt that the accused Eliyahu ben Shaul Cohen, who pretended to be Kamel Amin Thabit, penetrated the area of El Al, which is a military area whose entrance is forbidden, and this with the intention to gather information that could be helpful to the enemy. And whereas the very entrance to such an area necessitates death according to clauses 158 and 159 of the military judicial law, and whereas the gathering of information that could help the enemy and must remain secret for the security of the country necessitates death, according to clauses 271, 272, and 274 of the military judicial law, therefore, according to the rules of law number 6 of January 7, 1965, appended by law number 33 of February 9, 1965, and according to the rules of the above clauses of the military judicial law, we find Eliyahu ben Shaul Cohen, 40 years old, of the residence of Tel Aviv of Bat Yam Street in conquered Palestine, guilty as charged, and we sentence him to death by hanging. Damascus, May 1st, 1965. Of course, it was all fake, and they decided way beforehand that he was going to die, but what's interesting is that the clause that made, in their eyes, made it legally binding was actually visiting this camp specifically. And this was a very secret camp at the time. There's a very famous picture he took very nearby. Oops. I'm not sure I have it, but I'll try to show it later. There's when he was up there in the heights, he asked his friends, he said, I want to take a picture here. And they said, you can't take pictures. Sure, we're going to get in trouble. And he said, come on, let's just take a picture. And he kept bothering them until they said, okay, we'll take a picture. And he went to this area of the camp. And of course, he didn't take a picture of the camp, but he took a picture with Israel behind him, so that when he sent it back, when he developed it and sent it back to Israel, they would know which area was, as it were, in danger. And everybody's smiling and nobody realizes what's going on. And that picture was taken very close to this camp. This is actually site number 6. We're getting to the end of the 8 station stops. And it's a picnic area very close to the Chispin intersection, still in the southern Golan Heights. And nothing specifically happened here. They simply decided, because many people come from central Israel, by the time they get here, it's lunchtime at least. So it's a good place to stop for lunch. They put 2 cypress trees here that are trying to get water to it as much as possible. And it's just a nice place to stop. And they have another memorial stone here. And if you're going to be doing this this trail by car, you can't do it by bus. You have to have a car of your own here. You have to rent a car or have someone drive you. But here you'll often find IDF soldiers also taking a break because we're close to the border. It's not a dangerous area in any way, but you can, don't be shy. Start a conversation with them and have some bamba. So we finished the 6 points of the southern Golan Heights, and now we're moving up to, I'm going to continue here. This is number 7. It's the Syrian military headquarters near Quneitra. We're here less than a football field away from the border with Syria. And even during the Civil War, when it was going on right here, people came here. It was never really dangerous. And this was the place that the chief of staff's relative had to bring Eli to go up to the 2nd floor to the very edge here and get the okay from the head of intelligence so that Eli could continue on as a civilian with a permit to go to the Golan Heights. And it's also Russian built. And outside, Yuval Lufan decided to, along with Gil Brenner, they planned it and executed it together. They have the regular lock, and this is a symbol of the Mossad at the bottom with a menorah and a verse from the Bible. And here is a lock. And again, it doesn't say what the lock is for. You kind of have to figure it out. People have said many different things. Eli had to lock his mouth, or he had to lock his mind. As someone who works in intelligence, especially as a spy, has to break through in order to get to this building, for instance. You have to be able to be like a Houdini and get through locks. And that's what Eli was able to do with his charm, with his influence, with his money, with his apartment. This is a building you can actually go in. It's not a safe building. I wouldn't go there with little tiny kids. But if you are with adults, you can actually get up to the rooftop here, and you get a really good view of Syria. And this is stop number 7. And if we go back now, one less, this is at the foot of Israel's biggest and most recent volcano, known as Mount Avital. At the foot of Mount Avital, the last station is actually a sculpture of Nadia, Eli Cohen's wife. And this is Nadia here with Gil Brenner. As they opened, they started the Eli Cohen trail, and she was very moved. You can't really see it very well here, but between the two Nadias in the sculpture are her kids, her 3 kids. And she's looking towards Damascus, which is only like 75 kilometers away. And Avital, this mountain, is a very important intelligence base. It's interesting that right here, they would put a sculpture that is connected to Eli Cohen. And the Syrians tried to get this back through negotiations with the help of Kissinger in 1974, but Golda Meir wouldn't hear of it. And Avital is one of the most important intelligence mountains that we have in Israel. And I don't think that's why they put it here, but it's interesting to make that connection. On the back of this, if you go to the back, it says on the bottom here, waiting for Eli. Waiting for Eli. Nadia, for those 3 years, was waiting for Eli to come back. She did not want him. She wanted him, of course, at home with 3 kids. But also, now that we know that he's no longer with us, we're waiting for his body to come back so that at least he can get a decent burial in Israel, in the homeland. And the Syrians have not allowed that until now. And on the other side of this sculpture is a verse, a very moving verse from Jeremiah that goes as follows. Stop your voice from crying and your eyes from tearing, for there is a reward for your work, says God, and they will return from the land of the enemy. And there is hope for the end, says God, and the children will return to their borders. Nadia, who's paid the supreme price of sadness and loneliness, is still waiting for that possibility and is doing all she can, along with many others, to get Eli's body back, until now unsuccessfully. But a couple of years ago, they were able to actually get Eli's watch, which you can see he's wearing here on that same picture when he's sitting in Damascus. And they brought it back and gave it to Nadia, who then allowed the Mossad to display it in the museum at their headquarters. Now we come to, before we talk about the movie itself, and when we finish, I'd like to talk about what is mentioned as the 10 or 11 most important things that, or examples of important things that Eli Cohen passed on to Tel Aviv. Of course, we'll never probably know everything that he, and maybe we shouldn't, but some of the more famous things that were printed in most of the books that that were annotated are these are some of the important things that Eli passed on. Number one, political information on the plans of the Syrian government to establish joint headquarters with Iraq, which has a lot of influence on the entire Middle East. The discovery of the signing by Syria of a huge arms contract with the Soviet Union, in which they would establish 3 squadrons of MiG-19 jets and units of T-54 tanks. He also told Israel when the first 200 T-54 tanks and MiG-21 jets arrived. I mean, that's incredible information to give information like that. Towards the end of his time in Syria, when the intelligence folks were quoted later as saying, we could ask him a question in the morning and get an answer before evening came. The exact formation of the Syrian army along the border of the Syrian heights, including specific artillery locations. The fact that the front commander of the Golan, Hariri, wanted to warm up the border with Israel and shoot without the okay of the Syrian chief of staff. Details, and this was in the movie and it's somewhat famous, details of the Arab League's diversionary canal of the Jordan River headwaters. The idea being that Israel could not at the time bring water to all of its citizens without the Kinneret. And a third of the Kinneret's water comes from the Golan Heights. So by digging a gigantic trench across the Golan Heights and preventing that water to flow down into the Kinneret and taking it instead to the border between Syria and Jordan and using it for their own needs, then Israel would not be able to become too salty. The Kinneret would be too salty to drink from, and it would be a serious problem for existence in Israel. Towards the end of his time in Damascus, these are a few other things that he passed on. Where the power bases are in the government and the army. Think about how deep you have to be inside to be able to give information, both political information and military information, with incredible detail, just like when he remembered those 10 license plate numbers. The location of the 10th Division in the Golan, the number of tanks in Quneitra, the number of deaths of pilots in training. He had a good friend who was a pilot. The fact that 40 new planes arrived, but that the Air Force was able to get off the ground only 4 of them. And why was that? It turns out that his friend, the pilot, told him the following. Syrian pilots would do almost anything not to get into a dogfight with Israeli pilots and will make up excuses not to fly. That is worth its weight in gold. And finally, one of the last things he did, the whereabouts of a former Nazi, Franz Rademacher, who was head of the Jewish division of the German Foreign Ministry, was at the Wannsee conference and worked very closely with Adolf Eichmann. So these were just a few of the things that we know about. There's probably many more that we don't, that Eli Cohen gave over. And because of it, people believe that lives were saved. Now, some people have gone so far as to say that Eli Cohen helped the IDF in the Six-Day War get the Golan Heights. Most folks that I've read have said that's going a little too far, but he definitely helped in some ways. It wasn't that without him, it never would have happened, but he definitely gave life-saving information over years of time and allowed the Israeli intelligence community to have a hand on the heartbeat of what was going on in Syria. And the final part for tonight, what was and wasn't accurate in the Netflix series, The Spy. Now, again, as I said before, I am not from the intelligence community. I don't even know if I'm from the intelligent community, but I'm just a tour guide that reads a lot of books. But so we'll never really know exactly what was and what wasn't. There are some things that are definitely, to put it lightly, poetic license that they made up in order to make the series more interesting. And that's okay, because they said in the beginning that this is based on a true story. And it's true. They just didn't say which parts were based and which parts were the real story, and that's okay. It's not major things, but I tried to make up a list of a few of the things here, and I'll share it with you now. So, by the way, they talked to Nadia and her son, Sophie, who both watched the Netflix series, and they both said 2 things which were very interesting. Both of them said that they were hurt and insulted by the way that they portrayed Ellie, but that they were very happy that the movie came out because it brought out the story of Eli Cohen outside of Israel to people who wanted to know about it. And it's a very inspiring story, very important story. So they also thought that Mr. Cohen, Sacha Baron Cohen, did a great job. But they were hurt, and they said so. We can say that there was definitely pressure on the Israeli intelligence community to get a spy into Syria, and that was definitely shown in the beginning of the movie. The story of his recruitment by the Mossad, the intense preparations to going undercover are pretty much according to the books. However, if you remember the wild adventure of Eli's climbing up a building in Buenos Aires and breaking into the military attaché's office and is almost captured by Suidani, the man who captured in the end in Damascus, was definitely creative drama that never happened, and that would have been silly. Why get caught in Argentina when your job is to get into Syria. So that was a little added drama. It's okay. I'm not upset at it, just calling it as it is. And there were some other adventures that were put in there. For instance, when he's visiting the hot springs, he ventures off into the woods, he jumps on a truck, and he discovers some huge secret base. That's fiction. He never would have gone up to the border fence and given information to an Israeli farmer. That would not have been a wise thing to do. That was put in there somehow. But he definitely gave information about the diversionary, the Jordan Headwaters Diversionary Project. Now, the truth is, most people who've written about it have said Israel knew about this before. It actually was not a plan by Syria. It was a plan by the Arab League, which included Syria. It was just done in Syria. But they did ask Eli to get information, and what he did was he apparently he would go into the Ministry of Defense all the time because he was kind of like an advisor there, and he lived across the street. And he walked in, and after hours, when only the secretary there was there, he said, I'm thinking about buying property in the Golan. I've been there. I love it. And I heard there's a diversionary canal, something going on. I don't want to buy something that's going to be hit by this canal. So do you mind if I take a look at the blueprints? And they said, well, okay, but don't take it out of the office. Just look at it there. And he went in and took out his little camera and took pictures, developed them, put them into a leg of a table, sent it to Zurich. And within a few days, it was already in Tel Aviv, which is pretty incredible. So that part is true, but it's not as though Eli discovered it or that they didn't know about it in Israel. And the man in charge of the heavy machinery for the diversionary project was indeed the father of Osama bin Laden, but Eli never met the 6-year-old Osama at a party. That just wouldn't have happened. Although he did meet him there in the movie. I think it was just to say, for people to know, it's pretty amazing that the man in charge of this project was actually the father of Osama bin Laden, which is pretty incredible as it is. And lastly, and I don't want to break anybody's hearts here, but to everybody's chagrin, people always ask about it. The eucalyptus trees that shaded the Syrian bunkers were there long before Eli Cohen ever made it to Syria. And the Israeli pilots knew on their own from aerial reconnaissance photos exactly where the bunkers were. It's a great story, but it's even on the family website. But it's not true. If you look at the aerial photos from beforehand, and there's an article written by the head of IDF intelligence in 1967 of the Northern Command, that when he's talking to the head of Northern Command, and they're trying to figure out where did that story come from that Eli Cohen planted it, and they couldn't figure it out. But it's a great story to be told. It's simply not true. And the truth is, Eli is amazing and inspiring, even without these things being true. So I wanted to finish with 2 ideas. I think Eli teaches us a lesson. And one of the lessons, one of the Jewish values and human values that I think he teaches us is that one person, even one person, can make a huge difference in the world. He taught us never to underestimate the power of what even one human being can do. I wanted to finish with another movie reference for those who've seen the movie Saving Private Ryan. Do you remember in the almost final scene when Captain John Miller is about to die and he whispers 2 words into the ears of Private Ryan? If you don't remember, those 2 words were, earn this, earn this. And I thought about that a lot during the movie and also when reading the books about Eli Cohen. I think the people of Israel, and also as someone who lives here on the Golan with many other people here, and the friends of Israel and friends of the Golan, we need to, there's that famous ending words, we need to look into those terrible tortured eyes of Eli, of that terrible picture that I showed beforehand, and try to live exemplary lives. so that we can justify Eli's sacrifice. It's if we have a yoke on our shoulders to earn Eli's sacrifice for us. So it's an inspiring story, and I hope if you have been on the trail, you'll go on it again and bring some people who've never been there before. If you haven't been on the trail, next time you get to Israel, the Golan Heights, it's a doable trail. You can do it on your own. All you need is a car and some information, and I'm sure Yaakov and all those involved here, and myself included, will be happy to supply free of charge information about how to do the Eli Cohen Trail, and that you'll be inspired too. Again, I want to thank Yaakov for setting up the very broadcast of this idea, and I'm interested to hear many more speakers. Toda and Laila Tov. Thank you, Yaakov.
Tov, Micha, this was really unbelievable. Thank you very, very much. Really just inspiring, outstanding. And I'm sure everyone else also enjoyed. When we put up this video to our YouTube channel, onto the Facebook page, From Golan with Love, then we will have Michael's contact info, so you can contact him also for questions. Also, when you come to Israel, I think you're going to want to do the Eli Cohen. I want to do the Eli Cohen Trail with him right now again. And tomorrow's schedule, we're going to put it up shortly on the Facebook group. We'll send it also around in WhatsApp. And we hope to see you tomorrow with some good stuff ahead of us. Thank you very, very much.